Greetings from the far side of the galaxy, I'm Fuuri, your host with the most, here to tell you a story about titties. And these titties are some of the first we meet in-game, like 3rd or 4th if my math is right. But before we talk about titties, it's time for party poppers and a reoccurring joke. Gotta love the smell of reused assets in the morning. The reason for the celebration is that we hit the big 5-0. Oh, that's right, we're at 500 subscribers. I trust you know how these go. Wouldn't be here without you, your support means a lot to me, thank you all around. I know you expected Shenong, but I was halfway through recording this when we hit 500, so he'll be next. Maybe you should like and subscribe so you can catch it when it's out. Today's Housamo hero is Tokyo's timid bookworm, tirelessly toiling over strategies? Shit, fuck that up, we're talking about Shiro. Spoiler warnings for basically every chapter in the main quest, dude. He's a main character, I'm not sure what you expected. To begin, unlike every Housamo hero before him, Shiro Motori isn't a transient, he's from the walled-off city of Tokyo. Shiro is a second year at Shinjuku Academy and the class representative, which is cool but not really that important. What is important is that he's a member of the Summoners, which you probably already know, and that he's their lead strategist, which you probably also know. His role is the gatekeeper and his rule is resurrection. Although that may have been retconned. There's a series of Oath Akashic records that use their respective summoner's rule in their names. Ryota's is called the Oath of Abundance and Kengo's is called the Oath of Infinitude, but Shiro's is called the Oath of the Pioneer. So perhaps Shiro's rule is actually the Pioneer, but we haven't gotten any direct confirmation in-game. Regardless of his rule, it gives Shiro the ability to form connections to other worlds through which he spawns his signature sidekicks. They're called D-Evils, but I'm just calling them devils because D-Evil, while clever, sounds kinda stupid. His devils come in many forms for every attribute in-game aside from Valiant and World for some reason. To do this, Shiro needs his sacred artifact, a book called the Necronomicon, which is from the world of the Old Ones. Because his book is from the world of the Old Ones, Shiro can use his abilities freely without a need for an enclosed space. Oh, and he can also use it to teleport, but that ability comes with some pretty severe side effects. I'll get into the side effects once we reach the summary, but for now, let's move on to Shiro's inspirations. At first glance, you may think Shiro is lacking in inspirations, but Life Hunters actually put quite a bit behind this bookworm. As I said before, Shiro's artifact is the Necronomicon, which shares its name with the book from the Lovecraft mythos. In Lovecraft's works, the Necronomicon was penned in 700 CE in the city of Damascus. The author, Abdul al-Hazrad, was a worshipper of ancient entities Yog-Sothoth and Cthulhu. This earned him the nickname of... Damn it, Lovecraft, why'd you have to be so racist? While calling someone the Mad Arab is certainly not okay, all things considered, he could have named it like he did his cat, so I'll take it. Oh, and since we're talking about his cat, Lovecraft's father was the one who actually named it, which explains way too much about why Lovecraft turned out the way he did. The Necronomicon's proper name is the Al-Azif. It's a made-up Arabic word that supposedly means the noise made by nocturnal insects that's said to be the howl of demons in the night. The name Necronomicon came about in 950 when it was translated into Greek before summarily being destroyed. Despite its destruction, it turned up again when Olaus Wormius made a Latin translation in the 13th century. Hang on, there's no way that's a real name. Oh my god, that's not just an actual name, that's a real name a real person had. Imagine introducing yourself as Mr. Wormius. Anyways, Mr. Wormius' version was eventually translated into English by John Dee. His version never saw the light of day, but fragments have been discovered, and who's to say the entire thing won't be? A copy of the original Al-Azif was supposedly spotted somewhere in San Francisco, but the shop burned down, so who really knows? Regardless of the book's name or location, it's said to contain a whole slew of otherworldly secrets such as resurrecting the dead, a spell to reflect harmful powers, what knowing the true name of Azathoth lets you do but not the true name itself, and creating a portal to Narlantotep. While the book's abilities are great, it comes with a teensy-weensy little downside of causing its reader to go mad. Big whoop, my math textbook does the same thing, you're not special. And one last thing, Shiro's surname of Motori is taken from Norinaga Motori, who wrote the Kojiki. The Kojiki is a book detailing various Japanese legends and folklore that would later become the Shinto religion. Since there's nothing really more to talk about, I suppose that means we move on to Life Hunters' interpretations. To begin, I figured that Shiro was given the surname Motori since Housamo deals a lot with myths and legends. It makes sense to name a character after a historical figure who popularized a lot of them in Japan. And I suppose Motori would be the closest Japanese parallel to Al-Hazrad since they both wrote books about gods after all. And since we're talking about names, I'll ask if you remember Chapter 3, Berserkers. Cause if you're paying attention, you'll notice that the screen name Shiro uses is Abdul Al-Hazrad, the author of the Necronomicon. And the design of Shiro's Necronomicon appears to be based on the version from the Evil Dead series. The Necronomicon is supposed to be an unassuming leather book, but the Evil Dead described it being made of human flesh and having a face. His role of the gatekeeper appears to be a reference to the story The Dunwich Horror, which reads as follows. Yog-Sothoth knows the gate. Yog-Sothoth is the gate. Yog-Sothoth is the key and guardian of the gate. Past, present, future, all are one in Yog-Sothoth. And Shiro's original rule of resurrection appears to be a reference to the Necronomicon's ability to bring back the dead. And since Abdul Al-Hazrad supposedly worshipped Yog-Sothoth, it makes sense that he'd be the exception for the Necronomicon. Shiro also possesses some similar traits to Al-Hazrad, such as the interest in lost and forbidden knowledge. Even before he got his artifact, he was interested in and knowledgeable about the old ones. And the Necronomicon's side effect of making you go crazy is also shared with the one in-game. We even get to see it happen, but I'll save the details for when we get to Shiro's role in the story, which is thankfully right now. We don't know much about Shiro's past aside from the fact that he was a lonely little bookworm. His and Kingo's parents know each other, which is why they're friends, but they didn't really hang out in middle school. And that's just about it for Shiro's past. Dude's honestly pretty boring until the player walks into their life in Chapter 1. The first meeting happens after Ryota and the player make it out of the restricted zone to meet up with Kingo and Shiro. He handles the player's introduction as a transient to Mr. Mononobe, who then makes them a student at Shinjuku Academy. He's the main focus of Chapter 2 when he downloads the app and gets his sacred artifact. He can't control it at first and begins to think that he might have accidentally killed someone. Actually, hang on, do we ever get an answer for that, or is that just something that happened? The murder stays unsolved? Kinda weird, but okay. The player and Shiro end up getting into a battle where the sword that severs meets the book that connects, releasing the exception Yog-Sothoth. Shiro and the player smooch, or at least that's what happened if you aren't a coward, and the exception dissipates. Funny thing, they conclude that Shiro couldn't have been the murderer since everything resets after a battle zone. This is undercut by the fact that Shiro has an artifact from the old ones and can use his powers outside of a battle zone. Moving on to Chapter 3, he and the player go to investigate Ikebukuro when they're confronted by Snow. Snow kicks their ass and they wake up surrounded by Shuichi, who Shiro talks to online. He sends the player to investigate Ikebukuro while he talks to Shuichi in a cafe. Blah blah blah, Shuichi teaches Shiro about the game, blah blah blah. After the Thor exception, Shiro, Kengo, and the player resolve to make a guild. In Chapter 4, we learn that Shiro recruited Ryota and they go to Daikenyama Academy to learn more about making guilds. Shiro doesn't do too much this chapter, so we're moving on. In Chapter 5, the player gets into Hakumen's casino with Claude while the rest of the summoners do it by getting jobs in the kitchen. When the casino falls under attack, the summoners make a break for Sathogua, who teleports them away. In Chapter 6, as Ophion is launching his attack, Shiro guides the summoners to the outlaws who put them in a cell. They escape thanks to Shiro, but he collapses from the effort of teleporting them a whole 3 feet. He's out of it until Chapter 7, where it's revealed that using his artifact has caused the memories of Yog-Sothoth to rise to the surface. Yog-Sothoth is working alongside the genociders as they crush the Ikebukuro punching bags, berserkers. With the help of Shino and Houri Kuuri, the player severs the connection to Yog-Sothoth, bringing Shiro back. In Chapter 8, he and Shuichi team up to learn the true nature of the game. They meet up with Lieb and learn that Tokyo's been on a loop thanks to the app. Shiro shows up at the Otomachi Calamity and devises a plan to use the exception's power to break the game and save the day. Blah blah blah, they stop Yog-Sothoth by smooching. Again, Michael shows up and ruins everyone's day, blah blah blah. Shiro's barely in Chapter 9, so let's just skip it. In between Chapters 9 and 10 is when the Yog-Sothoth dungeon happens, but I'll save that for later when we cover the exceptions. In Chapter 10, Shiro and the rest are on a video call with the Berserkers who explains that the Warmongers are fucking them up. Which is the least surprising thing I've ever heard. I'm pretty sure a dedicated duck could give the Ikebukuro bottoms a run for their money. The player gets captured and sent to Penitentia while Shiro and the summoners break into Daikoku's underground auction. They use that as a means of sneaking into Penitentia, breaking the player out as they all escape, ending the chapter. The Thor dungeon happens here, and once again I'll cover that when we get to the exception. In Chapter 11, Shiro doesn't see much action. Rather, he manages the whole operation from the dungeons underneath the bottom's Berserkers, the Berserkers HQ. That's where Shiro's story ends in the game so far, as it's been translated. I know he's a main character, but damn, that took forever. In the interest of not wasting even more time, we're getting right into his units. Shiro has 4 units because Life Winners can't make this easy for me. His first star is normal 3 and 4 star, both of which are Nether Wand type units which are almost exactly the same. The only difference is in their first skill. The 3 star has a 40% chance to give arousal to allies in 1 square at phase start, and the 4 star has a 100% chance of giving Shiro some CP at phase start. Both of these skills suck, but it's not every day you see a 3 star with a better skill than a 4 star. They both have an 80% chance of inflicting fear after attacking, ew. They both have a 32% chance of removing an adjacent ally's debuff, ew. And finally, they have a 100% chance of inflicting curse when attacking. Say it with me, ew. These are likely some of the first units in the game, so I get why they're some of the worst. He's so bad that if he was going to get a skill evolution, he'd need 4. His first usable unit is a limited unit from the game's first Valentine's event. In the event, Shiro bakes chocolate using a recipe he found in his Necronomicon, causing them to turn into Chalk Shoggoths. The Chalk Shoggoths were a reference to the regular Shoggoths found in the Cthulhu mythos, albeit a bit more appetizing. His first skill gives him a 70% chance for Berserk at phase start, which is, alright enough I suppose. His second skill lets him heal 200 HP to adjacent allies after moving at 100%, which is better than his first skill. Thirdly, he gives allies adjacent to himself blessing 80% of the time after moving. It's a good skill, but nothing I'd celebrate. And finally, he applies curse to hit units 100% of the time, which is actually pretty bad. While this unit is a little disappointing, he thankfully has some skill evolutions. The first of his skill evolutions is Lovesick Plus, which gives him an 80% chance for Berserk Plus at phase start. And then there's Cook Plus, which buffs his heal from 200 to 400 HP. It also lets him heal 800 HP, give some CP, and nourishment to allies in slash range 90% of the time on turns by 3. I'd hate to sound like someone from a website that can't be named, but man, that last one was a mouthful. If it wasn't for that last skill evo, this unit would be worthless. Finally, we have the 5 star from the Mountainside Jamboree event. If this video comes out on time, this event should be having a rerun. This unit comes about when Shiro decides to be the leader for a mountaineering jamboree held by the missionaries. At phase start, he applies movement expansion to allies in reverse slash range and moves them to the right 100% of the time. This would be better if it wasn't at phase start, so you could maneuver Shiro to make the most use of the skill. When attacking, he applies weakness to hit units at 90% and to adjacent enemies at 60%. It's a decent enough weakness skill. At turn start, he applies fear to enemies in shot range at 80% and deals extra damage to them while being immune to fear himself. It's a bit unwieldy to use, but the skill does get the job done. When attacking, he applies vigor to allies 1 square around himself 25% of the time. And at phase start, he applies spirit at 90% and glint at 100% to allies in a 2 square diamond radius. Jamboree Shiro is a fairly solid unit, and that's before we even get to his skill evolutions. His skill evolution buffs his second skill, giving himself and allies around him tenacity at 60%. It also gives him a 90% chance of doing the same with limit in the same space. But he only applies that tenacity if he's above half health, if not, he switches it to limit. For a 5 star, I'm kind of disappointed. He's good, but not as good as some other 5 stars. Ultimately, I don't think he's worth spending a bunch of tickets on unless you're just a Shiro simp. In that case, go nuts. For my team recommendations, just don't use his normal units. They suck so bad it's kinda funny. His Valentine's unit makes a decent-ish healer, so use him if you don't have Gabriel. His Jamboree unit works well with weakness or fear teams. For weakness, I'd recommend Summer Thunderbird or Musashi and Robinson. And if you feel like making a fear team, use Narlantotep, Boogeyman, or Beachside Volos. With the units done, let's talk about Shiro's relationship chart. Kengo dislikes Shiro because he doesn't let him slack off. And Furufumi likes Shiro because they're both nerds. On the flip side, Shiro dislikes Shuichi for the latter's shady weirdness. And finally, Shiro himself likes the player because they kind of have a crush on them. Shiro has a loading screen, but I don't know what it says, but if you do, why don't you go ahead and leave a translation in the comments below. Honestly, I kinda like Shiro. There's depth to his character outside of being that shy bookworm, and the way he pines for the player is kinda funny. The fact that he also serves as a way to exposit lore does give him extra points in my book. In conclusion, Shiro Matori gets Fury's official seal of approval. Do be sure to like and subscribe for when I cover Shenong next. In the interest of not wasting any more time, I'll end it thus. This is Heroes Fury signing out.